can't have children," the Apache woman whispered. "Then you'll raise mine," said the rancher. The sun hung low over the desert plains, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and gold. The wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush and dust, swirling across the barren land. In this harsh, quiet landscape, the ranch stood like a lone sentinel, its wooden walls weathered and gray from years of relentless sun and wind. The rancher, Henry, moved slowly along the fence line, checking each post, his hat tilted low to shield his eyes from the glare. He had been working this land for as long as he could remember, each ridge and hollow as familiar to him as the lines on his own hands. The ranch was more than his home. It was his life, and it had always been a life of solitude. From the edge of the plains, a small figure emerged, moving with a cautious, almost hesitant grace. She was a young Apache woman named Maya, her dark hair braided neatly down her back, her eyes alert and thoughtful. The long journey had left her tired, and her feet ached from the miles she had traveled under the hot sun. Yet there was something in her step that spoke of quiet strength, a resilience born of hardship and experience. She paused for a moment, scanning the ranch from a distance, unsure whether she should approach. The vastness of the land made her feel both small and free. Maya had arrived in this place seeking work and shelter, but also for something she could not easily put into words. She carried with her a heavy sadness, a quiet grief that had shadowed her since she learned she could never have children of her own. It was a secret she whispered only to herself, one that had shaped her life and made her wary of forming close bonds. Yet beneath that sorrow lay a determination to live fully, to find a place where she could belong and contribute something meaningful to the world around her. Henry noticed her almost immediately. He had been checking the fences near the edge of his property when he saw her figure against the setting sun. His first instinct was caution. He had learned long ago that strangers could bring trouble. Yet something about the way she moved, the quiet confidence she carried, stirred a flicker of curiosity within him. He watched her for a moment, leaning against a post, considering whether to approach or wait and see what she intended. Maya took a careful step forward, and the crunch of her boots on the dry soil carried clearly in the still air. Henry straightened, keeping his distance, but ready to speak if necessary. When she finally called out, her voice was soft but clear. "Sir, I seek work. I can help with the ranch, if you will allow it." There was something honest and steady about her that he had not seen in a long time. He nodded slowly, his voice roughened by years of labor. "We could use the help. But I warn you, I run a tough place, and I expect hard work. I am strong, and I have worked with my hands all my life. I will do my best." Over the next few days, Maya settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She tended the animals, mended fences, and helped with chores that required patience and skill. Henry watched her closely, noting how she handled herself in the sun and wind, how she approached each task with care and precision. She was not only capable, but thoughtful, noticing small details that others might overlook. In the evenings, as the sky deepened into shades of violet and the first stars appeared, they would sit quietly by the fire. Words were few, but the silence between them was not empty. It carried a sense of understanding, a recognition of shared solitude. One evening, as the fire crackled and the shadows danced across the wooden walls, Maya spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I cannot have children," she said, looking into the flames rather than at Henry. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with a sorrow she had carried alone for years. Henry remained silent for a long moment, his gaze on her, not in judgment but in quiet listening. He sensed the depth of her grief, a pain that was both personal and universal. "I understand," he said finally, his voice low and steady. There was no pity in it, only acknowledgement. He had known loss himself, had lived with it for longer than he cared to count. It was not a thing that could be fixed, only accepted, and he could see that she carried her loss with courage. In the days that followed, a tentative trust began to grow between them. Maya shared stories of her childhood, of the Apache lands, and the lessons her elders had taught her. She spoke of the seasons, the plants, and the animals, weaving her knowledge into the daily work on the ranch. Henry found himself listening more than he had to anyone in years, drawn to the clarity and wisdom in her voice. She had a way of seeing the world that was both practical and deeply attuned to the unseen patterns of life. At the same time, Henry began to share small pieces of his own life. He spoke of the family he had lost, of the dreams that had been cut short by circumstances beyond his control. There was no need for grand gestures or confessions. They simply shared moments, quietly observing the world around them. The desert, once harsh and lonely, began to feel a little less empty with her presence. One afternoon, as the sun beat down and the heat shimmered above the earth, a challenge arose that would test both of them. A young colt had broken free from the pen, running wildly across the fields. Henry tried to catch it, but the animal was faster, and frustration crept over him like the desert wind. Maya stepped forward without hesitation, her movements calm and deliberate. She spoke softly to the colt, her voice carrying the soothing rhythm. Step by step, she guided it back toward the pen, her hands steady and sure. Henry watched, impressed, as the colt finally yielded to her gentle authority. "That was remarkable," he said, when the colt was safely secured. He met her eyes, and for a moment there was no need for more words. The trust and respect between them had grown into something deeper, something unspoken but tangible. As weeks passed, Maya became an integral part of the ranch. She was no longer just a helper. She was a presence that brought balance and calm. The tasks that once felt burdensome to Henry seemed lighter with her around, and though they still shared few words about their pasts, the quiet understanding between them deepened, a connection built on shared solitude, mutual respect, and unspoken grief. One evening, as the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, Maya and Henry stood together on a ridge overlooking the plains. The wind swept around them, carrying the scent of sage and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. Maya looked out across the land, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "It is a hard life," she said softly. "But it is beautiful, too, in its own way." Henry nodded, his gaze following hers. "Yes, it is hard, and yet it has its moments of grace." He paused, studying her face in the dimming light. "You bring grace to this place, more than you know." Maya's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. She looked away, her gaze lingering on the horizon. There was a quiet pride in her posture, a recognition that she had found a place where she could contribute, where her skills and strength were valued. And yet, beneath that pride, the ache of what she could never have remained, a shadow she carried silently, even as she built a life in this new place. The fire that night burned brighter than usual, and as they sat together, the silence between them was no longer lonely. It was a companionable silence, one that spoke of shared experience and growing trust. Henry respected her in ways he had never allowed himself to respect anyone, and Maya, in turn, felt a cautious hope stirring within her. It was in these small, quiet moments that the foundation of their story began. Not in grand declarations or dramatic events, but in the everyday acts of labor, care, and attention. In a harsh and unforgiving landscape, they began to carve out a space for trust and understanding, a space where grief could exist alongside resilience, and loneliness could give way to connection. And though neither of them knew what the future would bring, they had found in each other a rare and precious understanding. The ranch, the plains, and the endless sky above seemed less like barriers and more like a canvas, a place where new possibilities could take root, slowly, carefully, like seeds carried on the wind. For Maya, it was the first time in years that she had felt a sense of belonging, a sense that her life had meaning beyond her own sorrow. And for Henry, it was a reminder that even in a life shaped by loss, new connections could form, unexpected and quietly transformative. As night fell and the stars began to appear, they retired to the cabin, carrying the weight of their pasts, but also the fragile hope of what might come. And somewhere between the flicker of the fire and the stillness of the desert, the story of Maya and Henry quietly began. A story of resilience, understanding, and the slow, steady work of building a life together, one day at a time. The days at the ranch passed in a rhythm that was both comforting and demanding. The sun rose early, painting the skies in shades of pink and gold, and with it came the work that never seemed to end. Henry moved through the fields with practiced ease, guiding the cattle, checking fences, and repairing what time and weather had worn. Maya was always close behind, her hands skilled and steady, her eyes attentive to every detail. She learned quickly, observing not only what Henry did, but how he did it, understanding the subtle rhythms of the land and the animals. Despite the labor, there was a growing connection between them, one built not on words alone, but on shared effort and quiet understanding. Maya had a way of noticing the little things, the way the horses reacted to the weather, the subtle shifts in the soil before a storm, the soft murmur of the wind through the sagebrush, and she began to teach Henry to see these things too. He watched her with a mix of admiration and curiosity, impressed not only by her knowledge but by her calm strength, the way she moved through life as if carrying both sorrow and courage together. One morning, as they worked side by side repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm, Maya paused and leaned on her tool. She looked out across the plains, the sunlight catching her dark hair, and Henry noticed a shadow cross her face. "You're quiet today," he said, his voice gentle but direct. "Something on your mind?" Maya hesitated. then shook her head slightly. "It is nothing," she said softly. "Just thinking." But Henry could sense there was more. He had learned through long years of solitude to read the unspoken language of others, the way a glance or a pause could carry more weight than any spoken word. He decided not to press, allowing her the space to share when she was ready. Later that evening, after the day's work was done and the fire had been lit, Maya spoke again. She told Henry stories of her childhood, among her people, of the teachings she had received from her elders, and of the land that had shaped her life before she had come to the ranch. Her voice carried a mixture of pride and melancholy, a reflection of the life she had lived and the losses she had endured. Henry listened, captivated, feeling a sense of connection that he had not experienced in many years. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Henry brought up a subject that had weighed heavily on his own heart. "Maya," he began, his gaze fixed on the fire, "I have something to ask you. Something I have not asked anyone in a long time." Maya turned her eyes toward him, curious but cautious. "I have no family left," he continued slowly. "The land has been my life, but it feels empty sometimes. I need someone to care for, someone to continue what I have started. I do not mean to impose, but—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I want a child to raise, to guide, to grow up strong and wise, and I want you to help me if you can." Maya's heart skipped a beat. The words hit her like a sudden gust of wind, stirring a mixture of surprise, fear, and a strange sense of possibility. She had carried the sorrow of not being able to have children for so long that the thought of raising someone else's child seemed both overwhelming and, in a way, healing. Yet her pride, her cultural beliefs, and the memory of her own grief made her hesitate. She looked into Henry's eyes, searching for understanding, for honesty, for a reason to trust him with such a profound part of her life. Henry met her gaze steadily. "I am not asking you to replace what you cannot have," he said quietly. "I am asking if you will share your wisdom, your care, your heart. I have seen how you nurture the land, the animals, even me. I believe you can teach a child everything they need to know about strength and kindness." The ranch was quiet around them, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Maya felt the weight of the moment pressing on her, the choice she faced. It was not simply about helping a man. It was about taking on a responsibility that would define the rest of her life, a responsibility she had never imagined she would embrace. She thought of the children she had known, the ones she had watched from afar, and the empty ache that had lived in her heart for years. Could she turn that ache into something meaningful for another life? For several nights, Maya did not speak of Henry's request. She wandered the ranch alone, walking among the horses and the fields, letting the wind carry her thoughts. She thought of her people, of the teachings that had shaped her, and of the values she held most dear. She considered the child she might raise, the lessons she could pass on, and the love she could give without expecting anything in return. Slowly, a sense of clarity began to take shape, a quiet understanding that perhaps this was a way to honor her own life while giving something lasting to another. Finally, one morning as the sun rose over the plains, Maya found Henry tending the horses. She approached him with a steady step, her heart beating with a mixture of fear and hope. "I will do it," she said simply. "I will help you raise the child." Henry looked up at her, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over his face. "Thank you," he said softly. "I promise I will not ask more of you than you can give, but I believe, with you by my side, we can give this child a life full of care and wisdom." In the weeks that followed, the ranch took on a new rhythm. Maya prepared for her new role, learning what she could about child care from books Henry had kept and from her own observations of the neighboring children. She began to imagine the life she might share with the child, the lessons she would teach, and the love she would give freely, without expectation of anything in return. Henry, for his part, adjusted his routines to include her plans, sharing the responsibilities of the ranch, while also preparing for the arrival of this new life. Their bond deepened as they worked together. Henry admired Maya's patience and insight, how she could calm a frightened horse with a gentle word or encourage a stubborn mule with quiet persistence. Maya, in turn, began to see Henry not just as a man of the land, but as a man of character, capable of tenderness and reflection beneath his rugged exterior. Each day they learned from each other, sharing knowledge, laughter, and the quiet understanding of two people who had both known loss and hardship. One afternoon, a challenge arose that tested their growing trust. A storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds covering the sky and sending sudden gusts of wind across the plains. The horses became restless, the younger ones panicking in their pens. Maya moved quickly, calming the animals with her presence, guiding them to safety. Henry joined her, working side by side, their movements synchronized as if they had done this all their lives. When the storm passed, they stood together, soaked and exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment that strengthened their bond. "You handle yourself well in danger," Henry said, his voice warm despite the wind and rain. "I am glad you are here." Maya smiled faintly, her dark eyes reflecting both pride and relief. "And I am glad to be here," she replied. "This place, it has become a part of me, as strange as it seems." Their conversations began to shift, moving beyond work and survival into the realm of dreams and hopes. Maya spoke of her wish to see the land thrive, of her desire to pass on her knowledge, and of the quiet hope she had held for many years that her life could have meaning beyond the sorrow she carried. Henry shared his own dreams, of leaving a legacy, of nurturing a life that would continue after him. They spoke not as strangers, but as two people who had discovered a shared purpose in the midst of hardship. As the days grew longer and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts, the thought of the child became more real. Maya imagined the laughter that would fill the cabin, the small hands she would guide in work and learning, the joy and responsibility that would come with raising someone who would carry forward the lessons of their lives. The idea no longer felt like an overwhelming burden. It became a source of hope, a way to transform her grief into something beautiful and lasting. Henry noticed the change in her, too. He saw her confidence grow, her eyes light up with anticipation and care. He realized that this partnership was more than just practical. It was forming a deep, unspoken connection, a bond that neither of them had expected but both welcomed. And though neither of them spoke the words aloud, they both understood that this journey would change their lives forever, shaping them into a family in a way they had never imagined. Evenings by the fire became moments of planning, of imagining the future, and of sharing quiet reflections on the past. They spoke of fears and hopes, of mistakes and lessons learned, and of the lives they wanted to build together with the child they would raise. In these conversations, they found solace, understanding, and a quiet joy that came from knowing they were no longer alone in the world. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a space of potential, a home in which two people could build not just a livelihood, but a life rich with care, wisdom, and love. And though the future was uncertain and the challenges ahead were many, Maya and Henry knew that together they could face them. They had found in each other a rare and precious trust, the kind that grows slowly but endures, and in that trust they discovered a new purpose, one that would shape the days, months, and years to come. The first signs of spring brought a sense of renewal to the ranch. The earth, once dry and cracked, began to soften under gentle rains, and green shoots emerged, promising life after the long winter. Maya moved among the fields with quiet satisfaction, noticing the small miracles of growth all around her. Henry, too, felt the shift in the air, a subtle lightness that seemed to accompany the changing season, and amidst this renewal, the thought of the child they would raise became more tangible, filling both of them with a mixture of hope and anticipation. The day the child arrived was clear and bright. Maya had spent weeks preparing a small, cozy room in the cabin, arranging blankets, a cradle, and simple toys that Henry had brought from town. She had even taken care to weave small patterns of flowers and animals into the blankets, believing that a child should feel the presence of nature even indoors. Henry watched her work quietly, admiring the care and thought she put into every detail. He felt a surge of gratitude for her willingness to take on this responsibility, for her ability to turn an ordinary room into a welcoming home. When the child was finally brought to the ranch, Maya's heart ached with an emotion she had not felt in years. She held the tiny being in her arms with reverence, marveling at the softness of the skin, the smallness of the fingers, and the fragile warmth that radiated from such a small life. Henry stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, sharing in the wonder and responsibility of the moment. It was a quiet, profound beginning, one that would shape the course of their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. The days that followed were filled with learning and adaptation. Maya quickly discovered that caring for a child required patience unlike any other. She learned to recognize the subtle cues of hunger, discomfort, or fear, and she responded with a steady, calm presence. She sang soft songs she had learned as a girl, teaching the child the rhythms of her heritage, and she spoke gently about the animals and the land surrounding them, instilling a sense of wonder and respect for the world from the very beginning. Henry, for his part, became an attentive partner. Though he had not been a father before, he learned quickly, observing Maya's methods, and assisting whenever he could. He carried the child on his shoulders across the fields, introduced the child to the ranch animals, and helped with lessons in the ways of the land. Slowly, the child began to recognize them both as guides, protectors, and eventually as family. As the child grew, Maya took care to honor both her own heritage and the life of the ranch. She shared stories of her people, teaching lessons about courage, kindness, and respect for the natural world. She showed the child how to track animals, how to identify plants, and how to understand the subtle signs of weather. Henry added his own lessons: how to care for livestock, how to repair fences and structures, and how to work with patience and determination. Together, they created a balance between two worlds, providing the child with a foundation that was both strong and nurturing. Not all days were easy. There were moments of frustration when the child refused to eat or cried without reason, or when animals became sick or injured. Maya sometimes felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest, a reminder of how much depended on her steady hands and calm presence. Henry, too, felt the tension, but they supported each other, learning to communicate without words and to anticipate each other's needs. They discovered that teamwork was more than practical. It was essential for survival and for creating a home filled with love and stability. The surrounding community began to take notice of the child. Some neighbors whispered about the unusual arrangement, unsure of how to respond to the bond between an Apache woman and a rancher raising a child together. Maya, however, remained steadfast, confident in her decision and in the love she offered. She understood that cultural differences might create questions or doubts, but she knew the importance of providing a safe, nurturing environment above all else. Henry stood by her, reinforcing her decisions and protecting the child from judgment, creating a quiet but unbreakable family unit. One summer afternoon, a small crisis tested their abilities as caregivers. A sudden heat wave caused the water in the creek to dwindle, leaving the livestock restless and dehydrated. Maya and Henry worked tirelessly, carrying water from distant sources, guiding the animals to shade, and ensuring that the child remained safe and cool. Their coordination was seamless. Henry anticipated her movements, and she guided him when necessary. By the evening, the crisis was over, and they stood together, exhausted but proud of what they had accomplished. The child, though tired, had witnessed their calm and steady handling of the challenge, learning lessons in resilience and care without even realizing it. As the years passed, the child began to show curiosity and intelligence that both Maya and Henry nurtured carefully. Maya encouraged exploration, teaching the child to observe the land, ask questions, and solve problems. Henry fostered practical skills, guiding the child in the work of the ranch, instilling a sense of responsibility and independence. Together, they balanced freedom and discipline, knowledge and play, creating a rich environment where the child could thrive. Maya found herself growing in ways she had not anticipated. She discovered joy in teaching, pride in witnessing small accomplishments, and a deep sense of purpose that gradually eased the ache of her own loss. She realized that though she could not give birth, she could give life in another way, through guidance, love, and the shaping of a young mind and heart. Each day brought new challenges and new triumphs, and she met them with patience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the child's well-being. Henry, too, underwent a transformation. He had lived a life of solitude, but the presence of the child brought warmth, laughter, and a sense of continuity that he had not known he needed. He observed Maya with admiration, recognizing her strength, compassion, and wisdom. Together, they navigated parenthood in a partnership that was unconventional but deeply meaningful, finding joy in the shared successes and solace in mutual support during hardships. There were moments of pure delight when the child's laughter rang across the fields, or when a new skill was mastered, or when a story was shared by the fire at night. Maya and Henry often exchanged a glance, unspoken words passing between them. Gratitude, pride, and a recognition of the bond they had created. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a home alive with love, learning, and connection. Challenges continued, as they always would, but each obstacle was met with determination and cooperation. When neighbors questioned their choices, Maya responded with calm authority, explaining that love and care were more important than labels or tradition. Henry reinforced her words, his presence lending weight and credibility. Over time, even skeptics began to see the child's happiness, curiosity, and well-rounded upbringing as proof of the success of their partnership. Maya found herself reflecting often on the lessons she was teaching. She wanted the child to understand courage, not the absence of fear, but the strength to act with integrity despite it. She taught respect for the land, for animals, and for other people, emphasizing empathy and patience. She shared stories from her culture, blending them with practical lessons learned on the ranch, creating a rich tapestry of knowledge that would guide the child throughout life. Henry enforced the lessons with practical applications. He encouraged problem-solving, perseverance, and responsibility. He taught the child that mistakes were part of learning and that strength came from both physical labor and emotional resilience. Together, he and Maya created a home where learning was continuous, and where love was shown in actions as much as in words. The child grew to understand and value both Maya and Henry, recognizing them as guides, mentors, and parents. There was an unspoken agreement in the household. Care, respect, and love were the foundation upon which they lived. The bonds that formed were stronger than simple obligation. They were rooted in shared effort, mutual admiration, and the quiet understanding that each member of the family had something unique to offer. Evenings remained a time for reflection and storytelling. By the fire, Maya recounted tales from her youth, while Henry shared lessons of resilience and perseverance. The child listened with wide eyes, absorbing not only the stories but the values behind them. Laughter, questions, and thoughtful silences filled these moments, creating a rhythm that was both comforting and enriching. The seasons continued their cycle, each bringing new responsibilities and joys. Planting, harvesting, caring for animals, and observing the natural world all became shared experiences. Maya's teachings were integrated seamlessly into everyday life, shaping the child's understanding of the world. Henry's guidance provided practical skills and moral grounding. Together they created a life that balanced work and play, instruction and freedom, love and discipline. Through it all, Maya discovered a profound sense of fulfillment. The ache of her past sorrows softened, replaced by a steady, enduring purpose. She realized that motherhood was not limited to biology, that shaping a life with care, wisdom, and love could be just as powerful. Henry, too, found peace and joy in their shared life, grateful for Maya's presence and the family they had built together. And as the sun set each evening over the plains, casting long shadows across the ranch, the three of them, Maya, Henry, and the child, stood together, a family formed not by circumstance but by choice, love, and unwavering dedication. They had faced challenges, adapted to hardships, and nurtured growth, and in doing so they had created something enduring, something beautiful, and something that would leave a lasting mark on their lives in the land they called home. The years had passed quietly on the ranch, but the changes they brought were profound. The child, now growing taller and stronger, had become a central part of the small household, a source of laughter, curiosity, and energy that filled the spaces that once echoed only with silence. Maya moved through the days with a quiet sense of accomplishment, observing the child's growth with pride and a touch of astonishment. It was hard to believe that the tiny being she had first held in her arms could now run across the fields with the sure-footedness of a young animal and the gleam of intelligence in the eyes. Henry watched too, his gaze often lingering on the child as they tended the animals, repaired fences, or explored the plains. He marveled at the combination of Maya's wisdom and patience, and his own lessons of resilience and practical skill, and how they had merged in the child. He sometimes caught the child mimicking Maya's gentle way of speaking to the animals, or echoing his own careful instructions on handling livestock. In those moments, Henry felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the child, but for Maya, whose presence had transformed the ranch and his life in ways he had never expected. Maya's pride in the child was accompanied by a reflective understanding of her own journey. She often found herself thinking about the path that had led her here, the hardships, the sorrow, the long years of acceptance that she could not bear her own children. She realized that though her life had been shaped by loss, it had also been shaped by choices she had made, courage she had shown, and love she had given. And now, in the presence of the child, she saw a living reflection of her efforts, a tangible result of her care, wisdom, and strength. As the child grew, so too did a deeper sense of purpose for both Maya and Henry. They had built a household not simply for survival, but for nurturing, teaching, and guiding a young life. Each lesson, each story, and each small act of care became part of a larger tapestry, creating a foundation that would support the child through challenges and joys alike. Maya taught about courage, honesty, and respect for the land, while Henry emphasized responsibility, patience, and perseverance. Together, they provided a balanced upbringing, blending values from both of their lives into a coherent, nurturing environment. The community around the ranch began to notice the changes as well. Neighbors who had once whispered with curiosity or skepticism about the unconventional household now approached with respect. They saw a child who was confident, skilled, and kind. A child who reflected the teachings of both Maya and Henry. The transformation of the child became proof not just of their dedication, but of the strength of love and guidance, showing that family could be defined in many ways beyond tradition or expectation. One summer morning, the child approached Maya as she worked in the small garden behind the cabin. "Tell me about when I was little," the child asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Maya paused, wiping her hands on her apron, and smiled gently. "When you were tiny," she began, "you were afraid of many things. The wind, the animals, even shadows at night. But you were also brave. You learned quickly, and you grew strong because you were never alone." The child listened intently, absorbing every word, and then looked at Henry, who had been quietly observing from the barn door. "I want to be strong like you both," the child said, voice full of determination. Henry stepped forward, resting a hand lightly on the child's shoulder. "You already are strong," he said. "Strength isn't just in your arms or legs. It's in your heart, your mind, and your choices. Remember that?" Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest. The words, simple as they were, captured everything she had hoped to give the child: courage, wisdom, and love. She realized that the journey they had taken together, from sorrow and solitude to shared responsibility and connection, had led to a moment of quiet triumph. The child was thriving, not only because of their guidance, but because of the trust, care, and values they had instilled. As the seasons continued to change, so did the child's understanding of the world. They explored the plains with Maya, learning the ways of the land, observing the behavior of animals, and identifying the plants and herbs that grew around them. Maya taught the child the lessons of patience and observation, emphasizing that understanding the world required both attention and respect. Henry introduced practical skills: how to repair tools, handle animals safely, and work diligently. But he also emphasized reflection, teaching the child to think before acting and to learn from mistakes. There were times when the child struggled, moments of frustration or doubt, when they questioned their abilities or grew impatient with the slow pace of learning. Maya and Henry met these moments with calm guidance, offering encouragement without impatience, and gently correcting mistakes while allowing the child to learn through experience. Over time, these lessons became deeply ingrained, shaping not only the child's skills but also their character. Maya often reflected on the larger lessons she had learned herself, that love and care could create life in more ways than one. She had once believed that her inability to have children was a limitation, a permanent sorrow she would carry alone. But raising this child had taught her that motherhood was not defined solely by biology. It was defined by presence, guidance, and the nurturing of a life that would continue beyond one's own. She understood now that she had been given a different kind of gift, the ability to shape the future through love, wisdom, and patience. Henry observed Maya during these times, noticing the quiet pride and joy in her expressions. He realized that their partnership had become something extraordinary. It was not only about raising a child. It was about building a home, creating a family, and finding purpose and connection in lives that had once been defined by solitude and loss. Together, they had transformed the ranch into a place of learning, growth, and care, a sanctuary where the child could thrive and where their own hearts had been healed in unexpected ways. As the child grew older, they began to take on responsibilities of their own. They helped with chores, tended animals, and assisted Maya in the garden. Each task was a lesson, each experience a way to build confidence, resilience, and independence. Maya and Henry watched with pride as the child learned to balance responsibility with creativity, discipline with curiosity, and work with play. Their guidance had created not just a capable individual, but a thoughtful, compassionate, and courageous young person. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, Maya and Henry stood together, watching the child run across the field with unrestrained joy. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the wind carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Maya felt a deep sense of contentment, a rare and steady peace that came from knowing she had made a difference, that her life had purpose beyond her own experiences. Henry stood beside her, hand resting lightly on hers, and together they watched the child with quiet gratitude. "You've given them so much," Henry said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya nodded, her eyes following the child's movements. "And they've given me something I never expected," she replied. "A chance to heal, to hope, to know that life can still be full of meaning." In that moment, the two of them understood that the true value of their journey lay not only in raising the child, but in the transformation it had brought to their own lives. They had moved from solitude and grief to connection and purpose, discovering in the process that family was not solely defined by blood, but by love, care, and shared experience. The ranch continued to flourish, the land productive and vibrant under their combined efforts. The child, now confident and capable, began to explore new challenges with curiosity and determination, guided by the lessons of both Maya and Henry. They understood the importance of heritage, responsibility, and compassion, and they carried the teachings of their two mentors with pride. Maya often reflected on the journey she had taken. She remembered the moment she had first arrived at the ranch, weary and uncertain, carrying sorrow she could not share with anyone. She remembered the first time Henry had asked her to help raise his child, and the hesitation that had gripped her heart, and she remembered the years of patience, love, and teaching that had followed, shaping not only the child but herself and Henry as well. Henry, too, reflected on their shared journey. He had once believed that his life was destined for solitude, that the losses he had endured would leave him forever isolated. But Maya's presence had changed that, and the child had brought joy and purpose he had thought he would never know again. Together they had created a family, not defined by circumstance but by choice, dedication, and love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, Maya and Henry felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. They had faced challenges, adapted to hardships, and nurtured growth, and in doing so they had created something enduring and beautiful. The child, strong, capable, and kind, was a living testament to their efforts, a legacy of care, wisdom, and love. And in that moment, standing together on the ranch that had once been a place of solitude, they understood that their story, marked by grief, courage, and determination, had reached a place of quiet triumph. They had transformed their lives, built a family, and created a legacy that would continue long after them. The ranch, the plains, and the wide-open sky above seemed to reflect their journey, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, love and dedication could cultivate life, hope, and enduring meaning.